So today we're going to be talking about fraternities. And here we have Zac Efron and Seth Rogen in the movie Neighbors, in which Seth Rogen, his wife, and their newborn baby move in next door to a fraternity. When the partying gets a little obnoxious, they try to ask the fraternity men to quiet down a little bit, which is not respected. So they begin to try and sabotage the parties, which are it's then met with retaliation. So this chaos ensues and this rivalry begins. Here we have an image of a modern frat, and what I would like to point out right out the gate is that a lot of these young men look very similar. There are very few that represent, or at least look like they belong to a different ethnicity. So we do see a lot of young white men here. So talking about the history, so Greek life is associated with a lot of secrecy. And how did that come to be? Well, I'm going to read this quote from Flanagan, but they emanated in part from the Freemasons, of which George Washington himself was a member. When arguments are made in their favor, they are arguments in defense of a foundational experience for millions of young American men and of a system that helped build American higher education as we know it. So, Phi Beta Kappa was the first established fraternity in 1776, shortly after the reading of the Declaration of Independence, in which it was stated that men should be able to govern themselves. So these young men wanted to talk about problems that they were facing in their day-to-day lives or that were going on in the world, but they couldn't because their institutions were under rule of the British monarch and it was inappropriate to do so and they would face persecution. So in efforts of secrecy, they had a secret handshake and they had an oath, a badge or a key that they could show that they were part of this. They utilized mottos in Greek. Um, the entire point was to say that we are secure. We know that these people are safe and that these lips are not going to leave this room, that this is a safe place. So it was in part kind of this boys' literary club that they could be part of and participate in. And to date, Kappa Alpha is the current oldest living fraternity. Phi Beta Kappa eventually migrated towards more of a organization that recognizes scholastic achievement, however. So a couple of components that exist in a fraternity, there is a rush in which at the beginning of the semester, there is an informal and a formal rush, and this is your meet and greet and orientation to get to know these fraternities that you may be interested in joining and may be interested in hosting you. So the informal rush, you might see booths around campus, you just get to make your name or your face known. Whereas the formal rush is really an opportunity for you to present yourself in a way that they want you. They want you to join. They want to give you a bid. A bid is your invitation to join this fraternity. And a bid week takes place over several days. This is interviews, this is the orientation, this is parties, this is your opportunity to show up and be there and to really get to know these individuals. And the more bids that you receive is kind of a status symbol. And if you are a legacy student, meaning that your parent was part of a fraternity or sorority prior to you, you do possibly have more motivation to try and get into a fraternity, but you also do have a little bit of an in depending on who your parent was. A fraternity will give you a big brother, and this is a mentor. And I think that's really special in that when you are coming in as a freshman, you have no idea what you're doing. You may be floundering. This may be your first time away from home, and it could be kind of scary. So to have somebody that can be there for you and to help walk you through this incoming process is a really, I think that part is really phenomenal, and that I think more institutions should instill that. Then, as I mentioned, there are rituals and ceremonies, and these are methods that are unique to the frat itself. So it's kind of it's secret and that it doesn't really get out about what you did because you are part of this organization that's really aiming to promote exclusivity but inclusion for their members. So that part can be very unique. But hazing, on the other hand, is a process in which young men who are trying to join a fraternity are put on display or doing acts that may be detrimental to their health or their well-being, and may be embarrassing. So schools have really clamped down on hazing in particular. You don't really see much of that anymore, especially over the last 20 years. But it is something that has historically occurred, and in current institutions, hazing will be met with severe punishment, suspension, if not expulsion. So what are the motivations? Why would you want to join a frat? Well, for some students, it's the interaction with all four classes. So you get the opportunity to meet upperclassmen when you're a lowerclassman, which you might not get if you were to just join a campus. It is an eating club pipeline, and eating clubs are very selective clubs that only have about 150 to 200 members at a given time. But they originated in the 19th century as an opportunity for young men to sit down and eat, because there weren't actually like established cafeterias at the time. So once you're a member of an eating club, you are a member for life. And that's another, that's going back to this, like, this sense of security and the sense of being. The social life, in particular, having opportunity to indulge in drinking alcohol and to party, whereas you might not necessarily get that if you were a newcomer. It's national affiliation, so all of the Greek life fraternities are represented across the US. So you could be part of a fraternity on the West Coast and you go to the East Coast, and if you're part of a Greek life and meet another Greek life, that is you're in there. It also gives opportunity for post-graduation involvement, so even after you've moved on with your life, you have opportunity to be involved with your school. So, what are the socioeconomic impacts that exist with being part of a fraternity? Well, one survey of 40-year alumni found that Greek membership increased lifetime income by 35 to 50%. And that's pretty significant. So, compared to non-Greek members, you are making more money simply by being part of a fraternity once you're out of school. Well, that's kind of impressive. But what does that look like? Well, according to Cornell, fraternity men only constitute 2% of the US male population, but approximately 80% of Fortune 500 executives are frat men. In 2014, 76% of US senators and congressmen belonged to fraternities. Frat men made up 100 of 158 cabinet member spaces from 1900 to 2014, 40 of 47 Supreme Court justices from 1910 to 2014, and all but two US presidents from 1825 to 2014 were in fact Greek men. And that's significant. For only 2% of the population, if the majority of, 80% to, well, yeah, approximately 80 to 90% of these men are part of these major institutions that help govern our entire society. So that's pretty significant. But when you look at these positions, we think of senators and congressmen or Fortune 500 executives, what do we see? I think it goes back to this image of young white men or older white men more traditionally. But is that accurate? Like, are these actually white? Well, yeah, according to Princeton, it's true. A senior survey of 2009 to 2010 showed that 73% of fraternity members were in fact white, 19% of fraternity members were children of alumni, had the legacy aspect, 65% came from private high schools, and 68% were in selective clubs, such as the eating clubs. So what this indicates is that there is this level of affluence that exists, and there is this whiteness that it does exist with frat men. And this graph right here really represents that dynamic. So when we're looking at, families that make 500K plus a year, there is a bit more whiteness that exists compared to other ethnicities. But as you get lower, that disparity grows even more. And what I think is really crazy about this is that, this entire graph shows white men, this beige, whereas this orange is including Hispanic, Black, and Asian men. So you're talking about one ethnicity versus three or more. That's a pretty significant difference. So, what about the health of these young men? It's already been established that there is an aspect of partying and drinking that exists, uh, but there's also the dynamic of involvement in community. So, how does that reflect onto their health? Well, fraternity affiliated men report higher levels of positive mental health, lower anxiety and depression, and this also represents lower lifetime diagnosis of depression, though higher anxiety and more frequent utilization of therapy over a lifetime, though less in current attendance. Hospitals located near fraternities and sororities do not see a higher rate of youth injury. So, despite all this drinking that's occurring, there isn't a lot of injury that's necessarily happening, which is really interesting. Greek members engage in more alcohol use, cigarette smoking, sexual partners, and sex under the influence than their non-Greek peers, but show no significant difference in unprotected sex, condom use, eating, physical activity, and sleeping. So yeah, these young men are definitely drinking more, they're smoking more, they're sleeping around, but they're also taking care of themselves to the same degree that other college students are. And what we can also grasp from this is that despite more drinking, that it's not necessarily impacting their life after school, and that, maybe they have more anxiety, but it's not causing future depression. And on top of that, it's not impacting their financial gain. In fact, it might be improving it. Basler did a really significant write-up on the influence of masculinity on frat men's drinking. But writes here, college drinking has been identified as one of the most serious problems on college campuses. Every year, alcohol abuse among students is the most significant health concern on college campuses. National statistics show at least 1,800 college student deaths a year are related to alcohol. High-risk drinking also results in serious injuries, assaults, and other health and academic problems, and is a major factor in damage to institutional property. An important fact remains: the consequences of excessive drinking are a major social issue plaguing college campuses. With the understanding that drinking does seem to be a significant issue, we can now start to look at the factors that influence it. Now, this could be the older members of the fraternity, such as upperclassmen or your big brother, the group bond aspect, in that we've all had a drink with a buddy and felt closer afterwards, so you can imagine that on a larger scale for these fraternity men. Sex. Basler does quote one particular study that cites that men are more prone to alcohol drinking than their female peers, and particularly in college students. Male peers. So there is another study that says that male peers have a larger influence on college students than their parents do. Conforming to masculine expectations. So in a fraternity, you're surrounded by other young men, and if the masculine expectation is that you party and you drink and you want to be masculine as well, then you're going to engage in that same hegemony. And perceived social norms. One particular study said that college students perceived their peers as drinking 66% more than they actually do. The number was approximately half that. So if the assumption is that everyone is drinking and you want to engage in that same behavior, then you'll probably do the same. So the takeaway is that frats may be racial disparities in U.S. institutions. The group dynamic may foster a sense of community, however, it may also perpetuate hypermasculinity, gender role conflict, and hegemony. Look like me, be like me, drink like me. Fraternity involvement does indicate higher economic gain, and belonging to a frat has positive impacts on mental health. Here are the sources cited. If you're going to look at any of these in regards to fraternity men's health, I would definitely recommend this Basler, The Influence of Peers on Fraternity Behaviors, the Role of Social Norming and Masculinity. And thank you.